one on me still. There's a couple floating around here, man. I just killed one.
Are we capping the construction site right now?
Everybody stay down here.
We need to go to the construction site.
Yeah, they can handle it.
Oh my god. I'm so bad at this. Fucking hell.
Ladies and gents, PepperBelly here, and I'm bringing you guys some more Squad. Now, in my last video, I talked about a lot of the positives, the overall experience of the game, how it has so much promise and everyone should definitely be keeping their eye on it, as well as a few issues that the developers are mostly aware of. Now I want to discuss some things I would kind of say like are on my personal wish list, or things that I would love to see implemented in the game at some point in the future, as well as some issues I actually encountered and noticed over time, because as I put more time into it, I've been playing this game extensively over the weekend up until this point. Even last night, they actually opened up the first 100-man server, so I was playing that like up until like 6 in the morning. It was really fun. So through all those hours of investment, I've noticed a little bit more issues and things I would like to see. So that's what I'm going to be discussing in this video. So first we'll discuss my wish list, the things I would like to see in the game, or things I would like to see changed or altered or something, whatever. It's not obviously like, this isn't going to be the be-all end-all of this is what should happen. This is just a personal kind of preference thing. The first one doesn't really matter, honestly. Like, it's kind of an aesthetic thing. Like, it doesn't really alter gameplay, I don't think, in a very significant way. But what it is the weapon bobbing. Sounds kind of weird. Let me explain. When you're walking around with your weapon sights up, the weapon bobs in a very specific fashion. This is totally natural and normal, and this is realistic, because the weapon is never completely stationary like most games depict when you're moving, especially on hills or rough terrain. In general, the weapon will bob as you're seeing as I'm moving right now. But the one thing I noticed about the weapon bob that doesn't quite correlate with how it would work in real life is the actual motion of the weapon, where that pivotal motion is. And it seems to be when you're walking, coming from the base of the weapon, the stock. The back of the weapon seems to be sliding back and forth, bobbing left and right, while the muzzle seems to be fixated perfectly straight on its... So it's like it's pivoting on the muzzle versus pivoting on the stock, if that makes any sense. Because in real life, the weapon is secured in your shoulder, so it shouldn't be, you know, you wouldn't have the sight bouncing left and right when it's in your shoulder. The muzzle would be the one that's bouncing left and right, if that makes any sense. The muzzle in front would be the one that's, or would be the area of the weapon that's actually swaying back and forth, versus the back of the weapon swaying back and forth. I was just saying that it rarely, it's not a big issue, honestly. Like, even as it is right now, it's phenomenal. It's great. I'm perfectly fine with it. This is just a little thing that obviously isn't going to change anything that much at all, but it's just something I've noticed because I'm a very picky individual when it comes to stuff like that, right? Like, I'm very picky on weapon handling and how things look and feel to be realistic, because I'm just that kind of guy, I guess. But I mean, in the end, the game is still phenomenal. It still plays well. It's just a very small thing I would like to see potentially altered in the future. Like, it's not a big deal, as I'm saying. It's like, it's very insignificant to the grand scheme of everything this game has, right? Like, I mean, if I had to substitute that with obviously more improved game mechanics in all other areas, and obviously I would allow it to stay the same. Like, it's not a big deal is my point. Anyway, little thing. Moving on. One thing I missed from Project Reality, actually, was the weapon contextual menu. This was actually default in Battlefield 2, so it's not really like a Project Reality feature. But when you scroll up and down with the mouse wheel, the weapon menu would pop up on the right side, highlighting whatever weapon or gadget or a piece of equipment you actually had selected. That I really loved. It just made it so much easier to be able to move around while still being able to select with absolute precision and certainty which weapon or piece of equipment you want to use. I can see a lot of promise and potential there, especially for squad leaders who want to keep choosing which smoke grenade, you know, what color they want to throw. Like if they want a blue smoke or a red smoke grenade or just simple gray, it'd be easier to have like the grenades listed in the contextual menu and see which one is actually color highlighted and then just selecting that. Because it's a little bit easier versus having to memorize the numpad key, because every class has something different, right? And you have to memorize it all. Not that it's a pain in the ass, and not that it's too difficult to memorize. I mean, like a 3-year-old can probably figure out which keys do what, but I'm just saying it's a little bit easier to have those options, and it looks nice. I mean, contextual menus that are done like that, I mean, it was even in Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter on PC, and like, you would hold F in that game and you would select which weapon you wanted. It felt really good, like you just knew exactly what you were doing. It felt like I was looking at the gear on myself and knowing exactly which one I wanted to pick out versus scrolling or pressing the keys until you find whichever one it is that you want. Which again, obviously is not too difficult, but contextual menus are a nice thing to have. Next on the list is head free look. This is something that Arma does and some other shooters do as well. I remember the Canadian Forces modification for SWAT 4 also added it into the game. This is something I think would really benefit the overall experience of this game in a pretty significant way. And what I'm referring to is when you're doing frontal assaults in this game, there's a lot of times where you're advancing to contact or you're just advancing on the enemy as you're pushing through and you're watching and covering your arcs. And it feels really good. Like I'm telling you right now from like playing it, I felt like I was conducting an actual section attack that I've been trained to do in the Canadian Forces. It was like surreal how real it felt. Moving through tree lines, moving through the forest, like man, it kind of blew me away. It was really, really well done. Section attacks and frontal assaults and having the spacing of your squad and you're covering the arcs and everything feels amazing. But one thing that kind of took me out of it was the fact that although I'm pointing my weapon and my body at the enemy, in order to see what was going on around me, I had to turn and point my weapon at my friendlies on my left and right. Or if you're holding a defensive position and you got your arcs covered, you want to keep your weapon pointed in that direction at all times, right? So having your weapon pointed in the direction of the enemy and covering off your arcs and being able to look around with your head independently just feels that much more immersive, and it makes the game experience that much better. Because one thing I loved about Arma is just covering your arcs, sitting in a position and waiting for the enemy, or just sitting in a defensive position or whatever the case may be, and you're just looking around at your squad mates and you're looking around, you're communicating, especially in this game with local chat. It would really benefit the effects of being able to look at the guy you're talking to and be like, hey, what's going on? Look over there, like, you know, whatever the case may be. It improves the overall experience in my mind. It just feels better being able to cover your arcs, have the weapon pointed at the enemy, while also being able to look around at what's going on around you. Especially if you're, say, stacking up to get into a room, or you're stacking up against a wall and you want to look behind you, but you still want to cover in front of you, you can just turn your head and look over your shoulder. Things like that would really improve the ability to actually cover the arc you want, present a threat, while still being able to see and have situational awareness, without completely turning your back on the enemy and things like that. It helps to make it feel a lot better. So, free look, something I would absolutely love to see, especially if you have Track IR or Oculus Rift or any other virtual reality headset. That would be something that would really be beneficial for individuals to be able to free look while aiming at the same time instead of using like the Alt key or something that would obviously be similar to Arma. So that's that. Free look. Would love to see that. Next thing on the list, I would absolutely love to see, because this game does one or the other. Bindable, crouch toggle, and crouch hold simultaneously. A lot of shooters out there do this. I think it's a really good thing. I mean, even Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 3 have done this. I mean, almost every single shooter does this, where if you go into your keybinds, there'll be one option that's to toggle crouch, and there'll be one option to hold to crouch. Not so much as going into the game settings. What this game currently offers is you bind one crouch key, and then you choose in the game settings whether you want it to be toggleable or you want it to be hold. The reason why I like having both options is because I like to use hold to crouch on control, which is what this game defaults to, when I'm in the middle of action-packed scenarios. So when there's things going down, we're in a firefight, I need to move quickly, I need total control over my character. Holding the crouch alleviates a lot of the having to press buttons multiple times. Where you just tap it, you hold it once, and you have total maximum control of your character. It feels a lot more natural in the moment, and it's one thing I prefer when things are getting intense. But when you're in those relaxed states, like you're on a hill, like 500 meters away from the enemy, or you're sitting up in a defensive position, holding crouch the entire time can be kind of annoying. So toggling crouch in those scenarios is ideal. Or say you want to toggle crouch and lean to the left, because obviously holding control and hitting Q at the same time while strafing to peek out of cover and such is a little bit more difficult versus just toggling it and being able to strafe and lean all at the same time. Which brings me to my next point. I like to see the ability to also toggle and hold lean within the same keybind. So what a lot of games do, I mean, Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter did this on PC. I believe Ground Branch is going to do this at some point in the future because they'll be able to customize it. The same concept there, but instead it's binded to the same key. So if you hold down E just by pressing it once, you're holding the lean button. It's a hold to lean. If you double tap it, it toggles. Little things like that would help kind of benefit and make it easier for players to kind of control their character in the way they want to in any given scenario, because it's always different. For me, it's like things are always changing. Like toggle crouch isn't always ideal, and hold to crouch isn't always ideal. So having the ability to be able to choose and bind two different keys simultaneously for the same effect, but in a different kind of method, it really does alleviate and make it easier for you to just have total control over your character, and that's something I would like to see personally in the future, instead of one or the other. Now next up would be something that I've noticed when I was playing as a medic, and it was kind of annoying, not knowing exactly what you were doing in terms of healing yourself. Now you're able to bandage yourself and you're able to bandage friendlies. We all know that if you take out a bandage, you can bandage a friendly by clicking the left mouse button, and if you want to bandage yourself, you hold down the right mouse button. Same thing as a medic when you're using the medic kit, when you want to apply actual patching to heal your friendly. Left click is to do it on your friendlies, right click is to do it on yourself. Now when you're doing it to a friendly, you know how much health you're replenishing. They have a little circular indicator over their head, and you see it gradually filling up, turning green until it fills up completely, and then now you know that you've healed them completely, right? Everyone knows that. But when you're applying it to yourself as a medic, you don't really have anything to go on other than the color and tint of the screen, which even then, I think it's like if you have 10% under maximum health, your screen is still relatively clear. So it's kind of disorienting not knowing exactly how long or when exactly you're patched up completely. Like for me, the one method I use is just to hold it down until my screen is completely clear and then hold it for like 5 and 10 more seconds, and then I know for sure that I'm probably fully healed. But having some kind of indicator would definitely alleviate that kind of guessing, and would make it a little bit more intuitive and just faster to figure out. Because I mean, obviously if you're wounded in real life, you know exactly how badly you're hurt, and plus in real life you can't just heal yourself and become good to go 100%. That's not how it works, but this is a game, so obviously there's got to be some game mechanics involved to make the game and player experience significantly better. That's one thing I would like to see adjusted, just to potentially help out in the future. Whether or not developers actually want to make it more of a hardcore experience by making you keep that guessing game, either way is fine. These are just things I would like to see or addressed at some point in the future. Now, this is something else I actually missed from Project Reality as well, and that's the squad highlight on the actual map itself. When you click on a squad in Project Reality, in the mod, so say you're in Squad 3 and you're looking at the map, your squad is highlighted green. You know exactly where all your guys are. Everyone in your squad. Even if you're not squad leader, it's just like if you're in the squad, you'll know where everybody is. It's the same thing in the actual game squad, the standalone. But the difference being is that when you're in Project Reality and you click on another friendly squad, so say you click on Squad 1, it'll highlight where all of them are on the map. So you'll know where Squad 1 is located. Every single one of them, you'll know where Squad 2, Squad 3, Squad 4, wherever the case may be, whoever you click on, whichever squad leader you click on the map, it will tell you and highlight where every single one of those members are. This just makes it easier to determine where everybody actually is. So if you want to find out where Squad 1 is, and you don't know if there's any stragglers somewhere between, like, you know, your guys may be mixed in, or there might be like one guy from Squad 2 mixed in with Squad 1, and you don't really know because it's not that it's really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, but just having, as a squad leader, I can imagine, or the commander, knowing where everything and everyone is, and getting them organized, that would be one way of definitely alleviating and helping that process. Being able to know where every single individual soldier is related to their squad. So it's a little thing, because Project Reality has a squad, currently doesn't. Of course, this is obviously closed alpha. Things are subject to change, things are definitely subject to improve. The game's nowhere near being released, and it's got a lot of work to be put into it. But as it stands right now, things are pretty damn great. So, I mean, there's even that. But these are, again, things I'd like to see. Now, speaking of the map, again, this is also kind of related. One thing I miss, again, from Project Reality is how they binded caps lock it was done in a way that actually made caps lock useful. I've never seen any other game do this, and it's probably the best method I have ever seen to utilize caps lock. Because we all know some games you want to bind caps lock to VoIP or whatever the case may be, and if you press it, it still toggles on all caps. So if you go into the chat and you start talking, then all caps is toggled, and you're like, god damn it, you have to like press caps lock again and then retype, and it's a hindrance. It's like a really annoying, tedious thing to have to deal with. What Project Reality did is like, if you pressed caps lock, it would toggle on and toggle off really quickly, so it would never actually stay on. It would like double tap caps lock essentially, and it would open up the spawn screen in a similar way that pressing enter would. Now you can bind caps lock to open up the spawn screen, but of course the game doesn't quite recognize the way that works, even if you bind other keys, where if you press it, anything but enter, and then you want to close it again by pressing the same key, it won't work. You have to press enter, or you have to manually click close at the bottom right of your screen. So it doesn't quite recognize things 100% yet. But I would love to see that implemented, the same exact system of open and spawn map with caps lock, the exact same thing. I would love to see it, because that was, to me, was amazing. And obviously this is going to be a little bit of a gameplay difference. I don't know if they intentionally did this on purpose. I think they did because of the way that the depth of field works whenever you open the spawn menu, but you can no longer walk around when it's open. Which, as a pilot, I can see that being a little bit difficult, because in Project Reality, I would press caps lock and actually move my mouse around while flying to accurately look at things. You wouldn't have total control over what was happening, but you were able to still see, so if you were losing control of the aircraft or the helicopter, you can close the spawn map and recover. Now you can't even move around, so I'm curious how that translates to being a pilot in this game in the future, especially with the depth of field effects where it's like it blurs everything out. I think, as I was saying, because of the depth of field, it's intentionally made so you cannot walk around, kind of limits the ability. It's like if you either have total focus on what's going on around you through the map, or you have partial you have partial awareness of the map, but you also have limited control and visibility over the actual map itself while you can walk around. So it's kind of like that trade-off. You either open the map or you open the spawn menu, have full total awareness of the map and control, or you have partial control of the map and characters. So it's kind of like, yeah. So I'm guessing that's kind of intentionally designed, but as a pilot, I'm curious how that's going to translate to actually flying aircraft. Now, the last thing on this list of things I would like to see would be a ticket counter for both teams in the top right corner of your screen, because currently right now you can only see your current team's ticket count. Again, I'm not entirely sure if this is intentionally designed, because I will admit it does add this level of uncertainty to the game of knowing that you either have to do really good or even better than really good, because you don't know if you're going to lose, because the game could surprise you sometimes. Like, there are a lot of games where I would have like 5 tickets left on my team and we'd win by 5 tickets. It's like really crazy experiences like that, which are nice and satisfying in and of themselves, but at the same time, Project Reality had both ticket counters available to see, and it kind of let you know like who's winning, where you need to ramp up your game, where you need to improve, and how soon the game is going to end, versus the total uncertainty that you have right now. Of course, you can ask the enemy team what their ticket count is, but they won't always tell you the truth, obviously. They'll be like, oh yeah, we have like 3,000, just to like make you, demoralize you and your troops, so that you think there's no chance of winning, but you can't listen to them. You must press on and control the battlefield. But anyway, I digress. Something I would like to see, again, developers can address it. I'm not entirely sure what their plans are in that regard, whether they want to allow you to know, or they don't want you to know intentionally. Either way, totally fine by me. Now, it is time to talk about glaring issues, or minor issues, or, issues. There's only really 3 points I want to cover that I remember that I want to talk about, but these are issues I've encountered when playing the game that kind of ruin the experience at times. Now, the first one, again, is really well known by developers. There's been extensive talk on the forums, but for those that don't know, it's the eye relief of weapons sights. For the Americans, you have the aim point and you have the ACOG. The eye relief is indicated by the black hue, or the black circle that would be inside the sight. So you don't have a full clear sight picture like you would expect when you're looking through the entire lens. You want the whole lens to be visible. Think of it like when you have binoculars and you're holding it a little bit further away from your eyes, you see that little black hue. That's called eye relief. Essentially, you're seeing the inside of the actual optic versus seeing through it through magnification with clear sight picture. So the game currently has it where essentially there is no real sense of looking through a magnified optic. Instead, it's kind of like you're looking directly through a tube with the FOV altering and having the aim point or reticle there to indicate that, yeah, you are looking through an actual sight. But there is no sense of, there's glass there, right? There's no, like, glass you're looking through to illustrate that. Like, as you can see right here, you're looking through the tube, essentially. That's what the eye relief is. So it's not really actual eye relief, it just gives the illusion of eye relief, but it's actually because you're looking through a tube like you would be looking through a toilet paper roll or something like that, and then put, like, a little red dot on the end of it, and that's what essentially you're looking through. It's not really authentic in that sense. The developers are very well aware of this, and they're not going to be having picture-in-picture scopes. I believe they had it at the beginning of development, but then they were kind of realizing that picture-in-picture scopes, performance-wise, not really practical on the scale that this game is going to have. Like 100-man servers with a ton of vehicles on like 8-kilometer-square maps. Performance is kind of an important thing, because especially now, performance is kind of low, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. But anyway, so eye relief, something that needs to be addressed in the future. Obviously, they are really aware of it because this has been discussed, as I said, in immense detail on the forums. The official Join Squad forum. So, you can expect this to be fixed. They were actually having an internal discussion about this too recently when they were addressing the comments or the posts on the forum as well. So, this will be fixed, but it's an issue right now that I'm just mentioning just because it's the current state of the game, and I cover the current state of the game. Now, this is something that has been discussed a lot as well, but hasn't really 100% been addressed, and that is the difficulty in seeing enemy soldiers. You're going up against the enemy, it's hard to see movement or ID where they're shooting from or pinpoint their location. It's very, very, very difficult. Now, it's a love-hate thing. One, I really love it because no other game has proper concealing camouflage the way that this game currently shows you or illustrates. This game, you're actually able to conceal yourself really, really well because it's so hard to see people. Like, really hard. Like, when I first started playing this game, it's like, I had no idea what the hell was going on, because unlike Project Reality, I couldn't see shit. Like, I had no idea where the enemy was firing from. The only way to ID the enemy was to see tracer rounds coming from a very specific point, and even then, it was still difficult. So, this is something that comes down to a few things. Like, one, it's difficult to determine whether or not this is related to post-processing and temporal AA, because this is using Unreal Engine 4. There's post-processing effects, because things in the distance tend to look a little bit more blurry. It kind of seems like a depth of field effect. If you guys ever played Far Cry 3, you will know that depth of field is overdone in that game, where if you're standing on a giant-ass hill and you're looking at the horizon, everything in the horizon is blurry, because like it has Vaseline smeared all over it. This game, Squad, isn't nearly that bad. I'm not making that comparison. I'm just saying things in the distance tend to look a little bit more blurry because temporal AA and post-processing doesn't seem to want to render out that distance. When you're using anti-aliasing, usually it renders out at all ranges. Temporal AA seems to only kind of render out what's close to you, and then everything else doesn't seem to have it, so as a result, things in the distance seem to look blurrier and less crisp, and it's harder to pinpoint specifically where individuals are when they're not moving. Naturally, in real life, the human eye picks up movement. So, if things are staying still and concealed, they shouldn't be noticeable. And that's why I love it so much in this game, because in real life, if you played Arma, first of all, if you ever played Arma 3, you'll know that it has the worst draw distance for grass and concealing a player from in the distance. Like, it's like, it'll be flat terrain, and then a giant enemy soldier just laying on the ground, like, above, it just looks retarded. Like, it looks absolutely ridiculous. This game does it in a way that's real. Like, if you're concealed and you're hidden, it's harder to identify where you are. The thing is, though, when you're being shot at, it isn't that hard to identify where you're being shot at in real life. Not all the time, it's really situational, but for the most part, it is harder to identify where individuals are. Again, though, in the distance, visual acuity is there, and the game kind of eliminates that visual acuity that you would have to be able to spot that movement. Like, you could see movement, but it's not quite as vivid or clear as it would be in real life. If you were looking at a target 200 meters running around, you would see the guy, right? It wouldn't be that difficult. In close quarters, though, when you're fighting close together in dense foliage, it does a phenomenal job of hiding. Like that clip you saw at the very beginning of the video, it feels like it's dense. It actually feels like visual acuity is diminished greatly, and it's really hard to see things. Now, a real world story. I'm gonna share a story with you guys from my military career. A real world example. When I first joined up the military, I was going through basic. I remember we were conducting section attacks, and I was playing as Op 4 at one point. And I was wearing cat pad, and I had, like, you know, campaign on my, and it's funny because this was like in the beginning of my career, so I wasn't completely, I didn't know exactly, like, you know, I didn't have campaign on my ears or on the back of my neck and stuff like that. You know, I got made fun of, like, by one of the, I forget who it was, I think a colonel or someone actually, like a high-ranking official came up and like, hey, don't you think you're, you know, your ears, like, you gotta cover, like, anyway, I was being teased for it because I didn't put camo on my ears or the back of my neck. Anyway, that's besides the point. I was not really sure, because you look at cat pad and you're like, how is that really a camouflage that actually really works in dense, you know, forestry and stuff? And I can tell you from that experience I had, it really does work, and it's like, holy crap. But anyway, the point is, I was laying in the grass next to a tree with my C7, and I was laying, I actually kind of concealed myself. I kind of gillied up my position, where I took some tree leaves and some tree branches, and I kind of like obscured it to make it a little bit harder for them to see me by putting it in front of me, and I stuck my muzzle through it. And I had two sections. So that'd be two teams of Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. Two different sections. Approaching my position. They just took out one enemy, and they were coming on, and they were advancing on me. And I was shooting at them this whole time. Like, it was clear as fucking day. Like, there was no way that I would not have killed, like, 3, 4, or 5 of them. In fact, how close they got to me without seeing me, they would all be dead. Maybe exaggerating, but they couldn't find me. It was hilarious. And I can actually see the instructors in the distance on the road looking at me laughing. Because they knew exactly where I was, but for some reason these guys were completely, totally oblivious to the fact that I was literally like 10 feet in front of them shooting at them, and they had no idea. It was hilarious. But they practically walked right on top of my position. It wasn't until the squad lead, or the section commander, was literally like, I'd say 5 feet to my right a little bit, because I was kind of in a defilade behind this tree, like using the root of the tree, like the base of it, plus the foliage I set up. It wasn't until then, because I held my fire. When they were getting way too close to me, I stopped shooting, right? Because I didn't want them to, I didn't want to reveal my position. So as soon as the section commander got right up next to me, I decided to fire around at him, just because, hey, in real life, you'd be dead. Hello, you know, like, you're right here and I'm shooting at you. It's like, I'm Charlie, this is Vietnam all over again. And then they all just freaked out. They all screamed at the same time, like every single one of them just like, oh, there he is, holy shit, he's right fucking, and then they all started shooting at me and killing me. And throwing frag grenades at me and everything. And it was like, hilarious, because I was right there. So, I mean, that's a prime example of what it actually feels like to fight. You know, like, this game lets you experience that, because it's hard to see shit, right? Like, I can hide in the trees, or in a tall grass, and do the exact same thing in this game, and there were so many instances where I have managed to achieve exactly that, where I'd just be laying there and I wouldn't expose my position, I just watched the enemy movement. They'd have a fob, like, literally about 25 to 30 meters out in front of me. I'd be hiding in the grass, just monitoring their movements, until eventually they popped a shitload of smoke and came after me and killed me. When I finally did reveal my position. But there was, like, so many moments where you could have engaged, but you decide not to, because you know you'll die if you do. Because they'll all come down on you with hate and discontent, where you're the only guy there. So, I mean, there's a lot of those moments that are allowed to happen in this game, where in Arma or other shooters, it just doesn't seem to be a viable tactic. Like, it just doesn't seem to be something that can happen in those games. The only other game I can say that this exists is back in the 90s, like Delta Force. If you ever played the original Delta Force 2 had a voxel engine, meaning that the tall grass can be rendered out to an infinite range. So, back then, people would hide in the grass, and they would literally be hiding in the grass. No matter what range you were at, the grass rendered, so they would be concealed. They had a ghillie suit or whatever, they were hidden. It was amazing. Back then, I wish that kind of draw distance existed today, but it just doesn't, because voxels are impractical nowadays, I suppose, engine-wise and whatever for modern gaming, but it was amazing. And then even Joint Operations, which was their later version, or not their later version, but a later game that the same company ended up releasing, had a grass effect that actually worked out to multiple ranges. It felt really, really good. Like, that game did the same thing essentially as this, but back in 2004 with dense jungles in Indonesia, and it was really great. Like, so this game is the modern day version of that. It's so awesome, and I really love it. So, as I was saying, it's a love-hate thing, because at the same time, you do know that it would be easier to pick out an individual running on the horizon, but at the same time, not being able to see them makes the intensity of the game that much higher. I still think the game can look a little bit more crisp in the distance if they can find out a way to alleviate that blurriness, make AA work better, post-processing, some way to figure out that whole conundrum to make it a little bit more crisp. That would offset that difficulty a little bit while still being able to retain the difficulty of spotting individuals that aren't running all around crazy. Because if you're concealed, you should be concealed. Concealment is different from cover. Cover can stop rounds, concealment can't, but concealment hides you, same as cover. Concealment is obviously beneficial in a lot of circumstances where cover isn't, because if you can't see what you can't shoot, you can't really shoot it. But I mean, you can still get hit, so there's still that chance of being able to have a round kill you or whatever. So, anyway, that's that. Moving on, last thing is a sound issue I've noticed, and it kind of becomes annoying. It reminds me of the same issue that Arma 3 had during the beginning of its release when the campaign just started to roll out, where sometimes directional audio will not be accurate. So you'll have a guy firing to the right of you, or he'll be shooting in front of you, and you turn your head to the left, or you turn your body to the left, and then suddenly the sound cuts out because he's to the right. And then you turn back, and the sound's still playing. So it's like, it happens not all the time, but there are periodic moments where sound will just cut out in certain directions, or will be dimmed in certain directions, where like it'll almost be like it's audio ducking, which if you guys are familiar, some games do this where if you have voice chat and the person's talking, the game volume will actually lower. But for this, it seems to be a directional issue where some directions it'll just audio duck, and it's weird like that. It's kind of finicky. It's not 100% like foolproof. There are still problems. And it seems that only the onset of it seems to occur after prolonged periods of gaming. So it seems to be happening like if you're playing this game for a very, very long time, later in the game, you'll start noticing some sound issues. Like it starts to get a little bit glitchy and not as accurate, and especially when there's a lot of gunfire going off at the same time and there's a lot of explosions, a lot of shit happening all at once, things can get a little bit weird. So I don't know, that's something that needs to be looked at. Again, closed alpha. Remember that, guys, it's a closed alpha. For indie games, I can honestly say that closed alphas, especially, indie developers that know what the hell they're doing, an alpha really means an alpha. If we look at my Rainbow Six videos where we talk about the closed alpha, the game is more or less in a finished state. It's more, like I mentioned in the video, a PR stunt versus an actual alpha test, because obviously a lot of live streamers and popular individuals that have channels to showcase the game for free got access immediately before anyone else. So, and comparing their closed alphas to their betas to their releases, there's not a difference. It's more or less the core mechanics are exactly the same. Things don't go through tremendous changes, unlike actual indie games where the alpha to the beta to the actual release can go through some significant changes, and I can see that happening with Squad. More or less the core game mechanics are in place, but a lot of things will be changing and improving, and obviously sound assets, all those things will be adjusted as time goes on, and I'm looking forward to it. Like, vehicles are supposedly going to be released for testing in a few weeks, so I'm looking forward to that. I can't wait to just dive in and start driving around with an all-new physics engine and Unreal Engine 4. It's going to be friggin' awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. So, last thing I want to touch on. Game performance. This is the very last thing I'm going to close the video on. Game performance. Now, I never actually saw my frame rate until I finally added this as a non-Steam game to my Steam library and launched it through that and used the overlay to display my frame rate. For the most part, except for the map you're seeing right here, I get pretty solid frame rates. So I thought before I saw the frame rate, I was getting 60 frames on the various maps. It turns out my average frame rate for most of the maps was around 50 to 55 to 60, and then maps with more urban areas, it would drop down to around 40. 40 would be my average. And then this map, it's like 30. But you're seeing at the top of the frame, or you're seeing the top frame rate right now is around 40. It's like, it fluctuates, right? It's kind of like, it's not... My average frame rate overall, I would say, would be 40. But surprisingly, it feels pretty smooth. Like, I was surprised, because I thought the frame rate was higher from feeling the game out, but it turns out that it's actually kind of low. 60 feels tremendously amazing. It's obviously the most desirable frame rate, but this is playable. If you compare it to something like Arma 3, running at 30 frames a second, Arma 3, 30 frames per second is absolute garbage, right? That game, it feels tremendously slow, very stuttery, and like a slideshow. This game, low frame rates seem to be tolerable in a way that other games aren't. And again, this really depends, because every other game has a different feel and responsiveness for their frame rates. Remember when Crysis 1 first came out, that game actually felt really smooth at 30 to 40 frames per second. 60 felt insanely smooth, but back then, in 2007, no PC was able to run that game on very high in DirectX 10, maxed out, without, like, getting over 40 frames max. Like, back then it was 30 frames was the standard for Crysis, and it was smooth. I played the game 2 or 3 times through, initially on low, because my computer back then was crap, with like 20 frames per second, and that was acceptable. That felt like, you know, a decent frame rate for the game. So again, every game does it differently. Like, some games are more tolerable. Some games, for some reason, seem to have, like, 30 frames for one game may feel like 60 frames to another. It's a gross exaggeration, but my point is, like, some games feel better. I did a lot of repeating words there. That felt really weird. But that's my point. It depends on the game. It depends on the engine. So I think this is an Unreal Engine 4 thing. I don't think it's actually specific to Squad. I think, like, just low frame rates in general. But then again, it's like, I look at Ground Branch, that's on Unreal Engine 4 as well, and low frame rates do feel like low frame rates. So it could actually be Squad. Like, I don't know. It's hard to determine with 100% certainty. But the point is, the game feels smooth, even with low frame rates. But you can't compare it to 60 frames, because 60 frames, when you're playing this game at 60 frames per second, it feels amazing. But again, it's tolerable at low frame rates. So I just want to get the point across that low frame rates is actually tolerable in comparison to any other game that offers this scale and size with this amount of complexity. And when playing on the 100-man servers, which is what you're seeing right now, this particular gameplay is on the 100-man servers, I have 47 frames per second. It's fluctuating from 40 to 50 frames per second, and 55 the highest. And sometimes I hit 60 depending on where I'm looking. So it's like, it's decent, right? Like, the performance is actually pretty good. And it's not even optimized yet. The game's still in closed alpha. I'm hoping to see this game get some tremendous optimization in the future so that it's 60 standard, like, across the board, even on, you know, low-end systems. Well, low enough systems. A decent system would be able to run the game in 1080p, everything maxed out at 60 frames per second in all environments. That would be what you would want to achieve. Whether or not it's realistic and practical, we'll find out when the game is actually released. My name's been PepperBelly. Thank you guys for joining me today on this video. It's been long, 37 minutes. If you watch the whole thing through, blowjobs are in order. I'll see you guys on the next one.